Well, Hans Utter, welcome back to the Gnostic Media Podcast for part 3 of our series on music, mind control, and psychobiology. And I've got to tell the public, Hans and I actually recorded this episode a couple of days ago, and the recording failed to capture any of Hans's videos. So we're actually recording this episode for the second time. Neither of us are too happy about it. We're hoping it goes as well as the first one, but we talked about just releasing the audio only for the first one. But anyway, Hans, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back, Jan. How's it going?
Good. How are you today?
Doing great. Woke up this morning, put on some Motley Crue, some extra rap. Felt great.
Yeah, you you shut your thinking right down, and you were ready for the day after that, I presume, right?
Yeah. Don't want to think too much, So.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, that's what this show's about. I mean, Huxley's song, no more thinking, right? So hopefully we'll at least get people to think about music and subliminal mind control, suggestion, how they use music for all of this not so good stuff.
But at the same time, to understand that, as Fela Kuti says, music is a weapon of the future.
Music is the weapon. Music is the weapon.
Right, and this is an African musician. He had his own sort of compound, his own city. He basically used his music as a revolutionary engine against the corporate control of Nigeria. At the same time, he was also brought down by his bad habits as well as the government. So, but on the other hand, understanding all these aspects of music and the fact how they've been researched, a little bit how the brain works, gives you a much better understanding of the world you live in around you, right? It makes it much more clear what potentially could be happening. And one of the things that I do want to stress is that it's very easy, especially with the further interviews we go into, to almost not become paranoid, but to realize that there's some very dark forces, around us, and it's nice to know a little bit what they know and what we all should know if we're properly educated, and to sort of take that power back into our own hands.
Well said. And we talked about in episode 1 the blatant Satanism, etc., being used, and we showed a clip of Keisha gonna die young and all of this stuff, and I think you've even found more evidence of that type of thing, haven't you?
Certainly. I mean, this thread, which we'll go into more detail, but this is a thread that you can trace back quite a while. I'll just throw out a couple names, no detail, but Rob Lace, which is the basis of both Hellfire Club and Aleister Crowley's wonderful experiments on the human mind, MK Ultra beta test, as well as the use of just incredible amounts of symbolic manipulation with photic driving, with rhythmic driving, entrainment, et cetera, with lyrics and stuff like that. So you start to see something that seems like it's innocent, and then you pull it back a little bit. You're like, wow, this is well thought out and well researched. And if some of these artists are part of that, or even being run through the factory, so to speak, they're certainly purveyors of this process.
Right, at least willful dupes at minimum, and willful dupes, and we've all been a willful dupe at one point or another. We, pass information along that we haven't verified, and you get caught into believing it yourself, and then sometimes days, weeks, years later, you go to verify it, and it wasn't true at all. So, that's why it's so important to, verify things, for ourselves. Just
No,
period.
certainly. But I just have a thought on that too. There's a lot of times people say, "Well, go research it yourself," which is great. But the fact is that even just given my background in education, I mean, if you want to research all these subjects yourself, it's going to take a long time, and you may be able to do that. But hopefully, at least with you, Jan, we're presenting a form of information that's trustworthy in the sense that we attempt to verify. And if we have been fed false information, we'll go back and correct that. And there's a lot of obviously disinformation in the alternative media. There's a lot of different sectors that are offering different solutions or non-solutions, or fear mind state, fear chemicals, which shut down certain functioning levels of the brain, which is, we'll hit on that. We talk about A440 and things like that. But if you get a constant state of anxiety and a constant state of fear, which is an evolutionary artifact. It's not an artifact, obviously it's necessary, but if these things are being manipulated where other parts of your mind are being shut down, then it's very important to understand both how the medium, so to speak, the medium of the cognitive apparatus as it interacts with the world, and as well as what factors can influence that, and also to realize that there are things. I mean, I do feel very strongly that people, once they get a sense of what's real or what's correct, I think there is an intuitive understanding that generally is correct. Mostly it can be submerged, right? I mean, how many times have you walked into an event, you're right outside the door, you're like, I really don't want to go here, but my friends are going here, so I'm going to go. And how many times that little thought that wants to retract you from that action is there in your mind, or that experience, and so it's very important to, I mean, obviously we all can't, spend hundreds of hours researching every fact, but on the other hand, it's very important to at least acknowledge that those who are doing proper research are engaging with the trivium, quadrivium methods and other types of inquiry where we're actually formulating rational arguments. There's nothing to sell. There's a presentation of evidence without sophistry and without unnecessary fear.
Very well spoken. Do you want to dive into music and its effects on the brain?
Yeah, I will do that. And just want to say that I hope people do listen to our original discussion, because there's a lot of information we covered in that. And
yeah, and you and I kind of had a rapport going in that one, I should mention. And, and we brought out a lot of stuff just going back and forth in that one that, who knows, maybe this one will be just as good or better, or it could be worse. So we'll put the audio only of the other one out there and let people piece it together, because the issue here is, Hans, is what we keep discovering is the more is looked into this, it's just so vast that, 1 or 2 episodes wasn't enough, and then we added 3, and then it was 4, and then plus, we did another radio episode, and then another an upcoming radio episode for this, Tuesday. And so there's just so much information here, and people really need to go through and, I would think, in my opinion, review it several times and research the information yourself. Get online and do some research, dig around, and look at, what we're trying to hopefully present clearly here for the audience.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, it's important to also, take the time to realize that, this is your mind, right? There's a Sufi statement, the city of 9 gates. Your body is a city of 9 gates, which obviously all the orifice, right? All these things that are coming in from the outside. And in that sense, you should be the sovereign or the king of this domain, right? And so a big part of of how these things work is that we accept them. We're not aware of what's going on, or we just jump in with the stream. And just as a caveat, I mean, hopefully everyone can see the real insanity, the hyper, the hyper activation of these paradigms that, you look back in the 60s and you look around you now and you can see the exact same thing unfolding over several centuries and unfolding now at a very rapid clip. So, hopefully, we can, both of us together can give some tools to go into that. And the subject matter, I mean, it is very vast, and that's why I'm got several books I'm doing on these areas, because they're all interconnected. Going back to the beginning, nonlinear dynamic systems interacting. It's quite a complex term, but it actually, when you look at all these things, one element can create a different interaction with another element. But fundamentally, it's really connected with how we choose to see the world. If we don't take our own sovereignty, if we want to dismiss Plato and Aristotle and say, well, what they're saying about music, that's BS. I don't care what they said. I want to rock. I want to dance. I want to, do my thing. I want to freak out. I want to do what I wilt. And then, that's fine. But there's a certain reason how human society developed. And we'll talk just in a few moments here about how music evolved. And music is actually very closely tied in with human evolution and even the evolution of the brain. So let me just go ahead and dive into the brain here.
Sure.
Okay. So let's go ahead and look at slide 1. And slide 1, what we see is a representation, a picture of the ear. But when we hear any type of sound, it's being taken in through these receptor mechanisms. You've seen people with like the megaphone or bullhorn, right? So our ear actually acts as a natural acoustical device, right? The ear, in fact, the sound waves themselves are guided by the shape of the ear down the ear canal. And when they reach the ear canal, there are a bunch of very sensitive hairs. There's an anvil and the stirrup, and these vibrations actually set off sensations, and these vibrations translated to the cochlea. And when these vibrations stimulate, there's very small hair cells, and those hair cells are stimulated, and from those, these create an electrochemical impulse. And the temporal lobe is going to take these electrochemical impulses and process them. So, when you're listening to sound, in a sense, I'm not a big fan of Jiddu Krishnamurti. I can get into that later, but he just says one thing: music is a drug. It is a drug. It can be a good drug or a bad drug. But the fact is that sound can directly operate on the brain through these processes. And so our ear, if you ever get, you got into too many rock shows, you got ringing in your ear because you've flattened some of these hairs, right? These little tiny hairs, cilia inside of your ear. But the fact is that everything ultimately breaks down to vibration, electrochemical or electrical vibration, right? But that's the first thing of how sound travels into our brain. And the brain is a part of obviously a larger system, which is sort of our command and control center. We look at number 2, we see the brain, slide 2. And the brain has various sections, various parts of the brain, and these have been researched in a variety of ways. One of the primary ways of researching these the parts of the brain has been through people with brain damage, people that have, like, for example, aphasia, where they can't understand language. There's all different kinds of injuries to the brain that sort of show how the brain works. On the other hand, with neuroplasticity, the brain is extremely complex, and the brain can be changed. It can be transformed through what we do. But the fundamental mode of transference, the basic building block of the brain, is the neurons. There's 100 billion nerve cells in the brain. So the brain is a huge, vast network of these little tiny cells, and they're basically like input-output gates on a computer that all these come together and form various types of networks. And within the brain, there's several different types of neurons. Motor neurons, which are related to the motor cortex, which we'll talk about in a second. Sensory neurons related to sensory modalities. Modality is a word that just refers to a particular type of perception, for example, auditory, kinesthetic, etc. And intraneurons or associative neurons are those neurons that sort of create the relationality between these different neuronal signals. And I don't get too detailed on this. Let me pull up my outline here. But we look at the brain now. We do see that there's different parts, and these different parts do have very distinct functionality. So we've got the brainstem, the cerebellum, and I'll just briefly, the cerebellum locates and organizes information related to movement. The hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, these are responsible for our visceral sensations. That is, a viscera. You talk about like your stomach. You have a visceral sensation. I feel visceral.
This is slide 3, right?
Slide. No, it's not yet. I'm still slide 2.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. I told you it's going to be different. So yeah, I think people should listen to both ones. It's a different angle because again, these are just as a footnote here. These are really incredibly complex subjects. So to really give all the details, you're looking at a very, very extensive amount of time. But just kind of give a basic run through here. So. Hypothalamus, pituitary gland, they control visceral sensations, bodily temperature, sexual responses, aggression, and pleasure. Cerebral cortex is very important because that's sort of our reason, our higher functions. And then you can go ahead and go to slide 3 if you want.
All right.
And the brain is also divided into 2 hemispheres. So we have the left and right sides of the French Parliament. We also have the left and right sides of our brain, right? And the right hemisphere is associated more with creativity, with kind of spontaneous action. Generally, if you look at the yin-yang symbol, it's more of the feminine side. The left side is related to more sort of scientific logic, analytical understanding. And in terms of music, the right side is activated when you hear different melodies. It's also activated when people play music by ear, and it's connected again with that more creative, spontaneous part. And then when you learn how to read music, you learn how to understand key signatures and notation, understand how to follow notes. That also lights up the left side of your brain, left hemisphere. And generally speaking, musicians have a much greater degree of activation in the left hemisphere when they hear music than non-musicians. So non-musicians are experiencing music in sort of in a more kind of direct way, but the left hemisphere is kind of more the gating function or the analytical or scientific function. So we look at side 3. I did mention the hypothalamus already. And this is the limbic system. So the brain, the spinal cord, and all of your nerves, right? So our whole body is like a giant electrical grid, basically, with the brain and the spinal cord serving as sort of the central processing functions. And in the nerves are reaching out. There's different types of nervous systems and different types of nerves, but basically our nerves are what sends these signals back to our brain. And the control system and also the information processing system is the central nervous system. So the limbic system relates to our emotional responses, right? The limbic system can directly act on our emotions. In fact, the limbic system is directly tied to what we feel about something. It's related to our higher emotions, our higher thinking skills. So more complex type of reasoning, types of creativity are connected to the limbic system. And at the same time, the limbic system can be shifted into a survival mode anger, fear, things like that. So the limbic system is an extremely powerful. You look at almost, it's not exactly a binary switch, but it is certainly has kind of an A/B setting. And music can actually help to produce serotonin, at least positively constructed music, and so it can make you happy. And serotonin is a neurotransmitter, and I didn't get into that, but basically we have a bunch of fluid within our brain as well. There's sort of a liquid network which in with these electrochemical signals are translated. And serotonin creates a feeling of just basically overall well-being. It can also create joy. Is also associated with the release of tension. And serotonin, of course, is one of those fun areas of the brain operated on by antidepressants, which, don't get me started about antidepressants. Just as a little.
But when you think about music and serotonin, like trance music and these raves, people taking ecstasy, and then ecstasy zaps the serotonin.
Yeah, and that's really something that really should be taken into account, because there's a lot of good music out there. It doesn't necessarily mean that every song by every artist is bad. It doesn't mean that, for example, like Stevie Wonder, he has some great music. He has some very uplifting and positive music. On the other hand, it's important to realize that music can also be a, so to speak, carrier wave where there can be different messages. A different example is that of Ray Charles, who took the music of the church, right, the gospel music. And gospel music has been shown to have an extremely positive effect on the human emotions, the human nervous system, and actually on overall well-being. And he took gospel music, and then he put that. We'll get into this a bit later. I've got a lot of vintage, critics talking about what was going on. But he took it from church to the nightclub. He took the vehicle of gospel music and made it a vehicle for sexual license, for kind of indulging yourself and having fun. So even though the music itself, it's coming directly out of the church, and in fact, this music has been shown to have multiple myriad of positive effects, but it's a carrier wave in a sense for a message. And we also talked about Imagine. Hopefully people will listen to the audio of that. Is another example of that. But
let's talk about Imagine for a minute,
okay.
because we did have a good dialogue about Imagine in the other one, and for those who don't want to, go to that, but essentially, the Beatles song Imagine is basically a communist anthem and a New World Order anthem.
Yeah, Imagine is. If you look at the lyrics, imagine there's no heaven, imagine there's no hell. Nothing. Okay, it sounds good. Nothing to kill or die for. No possessions, no religion, no countries. You think about that a little more closely, well, you're directly talking about the New World Order. You're talking about, the idea of one world. It's a good idea if it's done, so to speak, where regions maintain their autonomy and they're not attacked by outside forces like the IMF or, even by outside media manipulation, which is extremely powerful. But the fact is that is the Communist Manifesto writ large into a song. But at the same time, the song uses very soothing melodies. You don't have a very fast, hard-driving beat. You don't have, it kind of lulls you with the music. So the music itself is positive. Positive meaning that, we'll look at some other stuff where there's certain music I can feel actually can damage you. Okay.
Right. So, what they're doing is they take something that's really melodic that your body enjoys and likes going into, and then they couple that with the subliminal message about, just accept the New World Order, essentially.
Yeah, but it's not even subliminal. It's right in your face, right? It's right there.
Well, yeah, exactly. But the intent is to slip it in, though, with that music, because if the music were completely different, and they tried to sell those words of those lyrics, it wouldn't work the way it does.
Not at all. And in fact, what it does is it creates, this Imagine has been sung, and like, I think UN gather, okay, but all over. People sing Imagine. And it's a really nice song. It seems like a nice song. You say, I'm a dreamer, I'm not the only one. But the fact is, most people aren't even cognitively aware of the lyrics they're listening to, right? And there's a lot of times of song lyrics that what they write as the lyrics, they're saying something totally different, And most of the time, I gave an example, and I'll iterate this again, is about this cluster of STDs found in a small town in Pennsylvania, where almost all these 13, 14, 15-year-old kids, just a massive epidemic of venereal disease, that it's charting of all the different the vectors of these diseases. And one thing they had in common, they were listening to hip hop, and they said, interviews with kids, we like the beat, and then they were reciting the lyrics, and then but look at their behavior changed. And in fact, I saw a recent study that was done where kids that watched music videos and kids that didn't were much more likely to engage in sexual behavior. And so these lyrical messages, and we'll touch a bit on information warfare, these words have extreme power as well. Language has, so you cannot discount the impact of language and the different modalities that are going through this medium of influence, right? So anyways, I'll get back on track here. So we mentioned serotonin, and let's talk a little about classical music. And classical music has been shown to increase spatial intelligence, increase long and short-term memories, increase cognitive skills in children, in animals and plants, stimulates brain development. It helps plants to grow faster. And in fact, animals become much more intelligent through listening to classical music. Melody and rhythm can aid brain organizational abilities. So what's that showing is that again, music is something we don't really think about. It's kind of a background thing. Oh, I like this band, I like that band. It's one of those things we kind of take for granted. There's obviously a lot of people who may delve deeper into music, but when you look at the fact that messages can be communicated to your subconscious mind through music, that I have a slew of examples we'll get into later about massive behavioral transformation, even at events, by what the performer said on stage.
I need to interject something here. I just had so you hear a song that you haven't heard since you were a kid or a teenager, and 9 times out of 10, if not higher, you can recall the lyrics for that song and the tune and start singing along with it within under 10 notes. And the reason for me bringing this up is, this is the level that music has on the subconscious mind. That song is in there. It doesn't matter if you heard it when you were 9. If you hear it, you're going to know it like that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that should be, kept in mind. And, going back to Plato and Aristotle, primarily for the youth, for the young people, right? What the music that the youth are exposed to can dramatically influence their development. And that's something, and we haven't talked about this, and I'm certainly not in favor of any kind of censorship, obviously not. But when you look at the types of music, now it's, it's really bad. It's unbelievable. But most of us, as you get older, you're not even interacting with that segment of the music, marketing or music industry. But these things are written on your mind and actually help to sort of establish your fundamental ways of being in the world, not just your musical taste, but how you understand relationships, how you understand cause and effect, to what extent you can handle abstract notions, to what extent, etc.
Here's the issue would be, how much does your awareness of this stuff going on limit its impact on your mind and who you are and the way you react to this type of programming? And that's what it is, programming. Obviously, if you're aware of it, you have an education, you've watched the entire series of Hans and my discussion. You've heard all of our extra updates on the radio show and bonus episodes and everything else on this. And so at least you have a sort of a sensory overview of the situation. How much is that going to help you?
That's one of the that's probably the most important thing is develop awareness. It's just like a habit pattern, right? You have an inscribed habit pattern.
Sure, but let me just interject. If you were aware of this information and how this stuff works, let's say one person is aware of this information and how it works and how they're doing this in music, but has never been subjected to Keisha or Madonna or any of this other crap, right? Versus person two who's aware of this information and has a whole lifetime of being subjected to that stuff. What would be the difference, do you think, in their, how they have reacted in life to that? Would both be more aware? Would one of them be better off without that programming at all?
Well, the fact is that there's going to be a degree of resistance, right? And if you start to realize, okay, well, I want to sort of go through my understanding of music, and I want to use music in a positive way. There's going to be resistance as soon as you go into more complex types of music. You're going to almost have, sometimes you'll have a shutdown response. You're going to get tired. I think a lot of people that are affected by this conditioning may even listen to this. They may feel sleepy. They may just walk away. They may do this or that. Look at that motto. If it's too loud, you're too old. No, if it's too loud, we can look you up on the Soviet declassified document talking about the effect of loud noise. But the more you're defined and identified with your control mechanism, the more you're flattered by it, the more hold it has, right? And so in a sense, it just depends on the individual's motivation. And, certainly, again, it's not a sense of being paranoid because, when you see, we talked extensively about Muzak before, but this whole thing and feeding off of Muzak, a lot of musicians now make their living through tribute bands and cover bands. I myself was playing with North America's Best Santana tribute band. So I had to learn all Carlos Santana's solos. And at one point I was like, I even have to play the solo where he's tripping too hard and he plays the wrong note. Yep. So I learned, but all these bands, you have the Zeppelin tribute bands, it's sort of this before the star tier. If you look at lots and lots of, you go all the resorts, all the casinos, all over, there are bands. In fact, that's the best way to earn a living as a musician is to play in a tribute band or to play in a cover band. And there's a narrow radius for what this music is. So not only has the radio and our external environment become affected, but music, the musicians themselves are forced to perform these particular songs over and over again, like this ritual that will not end. And fundamentally, the main thing is just I think it comes down to a sensory grounding, to go back to sort of a point of just being able to get into a phenomenological, direct apprehension of what's happening inside of you. You hear a song, what's it doing to me? How do I feel? When do I go into a habitual response? When am I being conditioned? And that really takes more of a inventory and a very accurate assessment of how you're directly perceiving the world. And, of course, and this ties into logic too, but I do think that the clearing the sensory channels, so to speak, and being able to, most of the things we see, obviously, if I have to pick up a pencil and I have to spend 2.5 hours thinking of who made this pencil, why is it a pencil? Why is it called a pencil? How does my hand move? How do my afferent nerves connect? It'll take me 2 hours to do anything. So you have to be aware of when your general habitual responses, which are just ingrained, so we don't have to, spend 2 hours to brush our teeth, as opposed to when you're being programmed with a conditioned response. The first step is being aware that's going on. The second step is knowing a bit about the architecture of your own mind and your brain. And the third step is making a conscious choice and say, you know what, I'm going to find out how this has impinged on my life. And this, it's not just going to be, this is not, a monolithic entity. I mean, I mentioned the Princeton Radio Project. So basically, when the use and discovery of the mass media was worked on, music was approached the most scientifically, but all the different forms of mass consciousness transmission were integrated into that. So the psychoacoustics, the bioenergetic aspects of music, but these are all interlinked, right? So basically, it's kind of like breaking conditioning, but at the same time, it requires discipline, and I think it's important. If you learn about music, if you learn how music works, you learn the beauty of music, you learn the empowering aspects, and the amazing thing is, well, here's this vibrational energy. It's just sound waves. I mean, it's just sound waves our brain translates, because all it is sound. There's nothing inherently in music that makes it meaningful. It's our brains that create that meaningful platform. So if someone has been heavily conditioned, most likely they won't even listen to this. They may have internal resistance. At the same time, when you pull these layers of the onion back, so to speak, you're going to find that these are maybe connected with all kinds of emotions and all these kind of things, right? So, or different experiences in your life.
You would have it tied to, especially if you heard it as a teenager, quote unquote, which is another word that they made up. But if you hear it during those years, then you're going to have a much stronger emotional response to it when you're older, even. So you're going to, want to, you're going to have Stockholm syndrome essentially to protect whatever conditioning that you had when you were in those younger years.
Yeah, and the fact is that I think we're most vulnerable to conditioning in that period. In that period when we're also most vulnerable to participating in mass rituals like techno, like the hippie experience, like even punk rock. I was playing punk rock, which at the time I enjoyed it. At the time it seemed very liberating, but a lot of punk rock, to be honest, is not that powerful per se as music. As soon as you get some more maturity, you're just going to not even want to listen to it, right? But as a cultural movement. So we have to look at the construction of subcultural and cultural groupings, going back to the first episode, and looking at the collective aspect of music and manipulation, as well as the individual aspect. So, but a lot of the things that happen to you when you're a teenager, I would say in a more benign way, is that, it's, you may hear a flock of seagulls, and, it's a way to trace. It's a way to trace back in your own mind the entrails, so to speak, of this system, and and to see what else also is interconnected with that, right?
Right.
So, yeah, okay, we're kind of going.
Well, I was just going to ask you real quick. Two things. All right, so Arthur, I wanted to bring up Arthur Koelster's Ghost in the Machine and his whole focus on pediomorphosis, which is focusing on the children as the target to change everything. So Larry, Huxley, all of these guys, they all like to cite the Ghost in the Machine. That's the main point I had. But, I was going to ask with flock of seagulls, let's say you hear Iran, what is do you see any different meaning there in that now? What was the programming there, or?
Well, we're going to get into this in more, the thing is that if you listen to a flock of seagulls, right? I ran so far away, I could not get away. There's certain generational types of programming, which you might even find in your dreams. I'm not trying to be too airy-fairy, but there are certain types of dreams. There are certain types of fear impulses that, especially during the early MTV era, that were being encoded in the mind, and that are very. You can find rather innocuous lyrics. You look at the video, you're going to get a different element of that, but you can find I ran so far away, I could not get away. This is a fear. This is a conditioned fear response. This is sort of the basic vibrational frequency of our society. And what's very interesting, we'll get into this a little bit deeper, but the use of music as part of much wider generational shaping is very important. And there's a lot of songs that don't mean anything. When I was growing up, when I was a little kid, MTV, I was in the 2 test markets for MTV in America. So I saw the beginnings of MTV when they had 3 videos on, right? I think I was like 8 or 9 years old. And there was 2 videos. Video Killed the Radio Star and Hurt So Good, John Cougar Mellencamp. Hurt So Good. Sometimes love don't feel like it should. Come on, baby. You make it hurt so good. Actually, I met John Cougar. But there's a statement of purpose. Video Killed the Radio Star. Right? And this is a one-hit wonder. One-hit wonder can sometimes mean psyop. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, and Hurt So Good. I mean, that is a song about S&M. That's what it's about. Sometimes love don't feel like it should. And you're a child, and then they started adding. And we'll get into this. I know people don't like when I say this.
Oh, man.
But no, this is a vast subject, but I want to put the entity out. You start looking at the MTV little trailers, and the MTV trailers are mind-blowing. I mean, you talk about revelation of the method. You look at the little MTV trailer, these little 2.5-second clips, you're going to see, I've got a bunch of these for you, man. You see these, you'll be blown away. They show someone's head, just like a tube feeding into programming. Everything is shown in these little MTV clips. And so that's a more advanced stage of it. But, if you look at these generational songs, you do find that, the positive thing is, look, if you're in you and Cameron's laboratory, you're not going to recover from that. You're going to be a wreck the rest of your life. But most of us are not. So, in a sense, music is a fun way or fun is maybe the wrong word, but an enjoyable way to look and examine a conditioning. And as soon as you examine that conditioning, as long as you can go past your resistance and go past even your identification. So people, the 60s, man, I love the Beatles, and someone says that. I love the Beatles. They've identified with this group. And so you're almost pulling a rug out from under them in terms of their own identity, especially if they grew up in that era. That's their formative years. And that's a basis of their identity as a human being and how they define themselves. And it, other hand doesn't mean that, the Beatles actually, they're if you compare them to a lot of other bands, they're very good musicians. They did some music that I think is substantial in terms of just, in terms of how it was put together, how it was produced. But there's other aspects of the Beatles music that is very directly related to mind control operations, especially if you're on LSD. And there's other bands that are just directly plugged into that. So, there are a plethora of negative subconscious messages that influence us or can influence us, programmed through this medium. But the good thing is, unlike, say, a TV show you saw, you can actually get a hold of, if you start to understand music, you can actually get a hold of that and start to reverse that programming.
All right, so let's get back into discussing classical music and the difference between the classical music and everything else.
Okay, yeah. So music itself has been shown to affect the hormonal system, right? It affects the hormones. It affects our breathing rate, the electrical resistance of the skin, You can see very direct physiological responses, dilation of pupils, blood pressure, heart rate changes. And in terms of music, then there's other types of music, like I believe Indian classical music and probably many other forms of music that have this effect. They can allow the brain to concentrate more easily. It can allow you to be able to assimilate more information in less time. And it can actually operate on both left and right hemispheres of the brain. And just going back a little bit, if you look at people that do not have any kind of grounding and any understanding of what's actually happening to them, they're really participating in a hypnotic, subconscious, mimetic, which mimetic means that, you're kind of mirroring the people around you, mimesis, right? So you're not activating the left side of your mind. So ideally, with music, you're activating both left and right sides of the mind. And that's what produces the positive effect. And so there's lots and lots of examples of this, how this works. Mozart effect, complex music can improve performance of the spatial temporal reasoning, short-term memory, as well as the timing of the music and even the BPM of the music, right? The speed of the music has an effect on direct effect, the entrainment effect on the brain waves. We got on that last time. And children who study music have increased cognitive benefits. But let's look at some of the evidence here in an empirical way, how this works on animals and on plants. So particular types of music with the right balance of rhythm and melody. This is not heavily driving, repetitively rhythmic music, but music with a varied type of rhythm and also the melodic development. They found that hens laid more eggs, cats were more relaxed, cows produced more milk. Just one example, a plethora of studies. And what's very interesting is they took lab rats and they set them up in a box where there were two tubes. In one of these boxes, they were playing a piece of classical music. In the other box, they were playing hard rock. And the rats, en masse, almost all of them gravitated to the box with the classical music. And even after that, they still were attracted to that particular position, to that box where there was classical music. And in terms of plants, there's been examples of where types of classical music, and by that I don't want to say just Western classical music, but any type of refined and developed musical tradition, right? That's developed with the full knowledge as a left and right brain integration, etc. The plants listen to classical music, thrive. They bloomed, and hard rock killed the plants. The plants actually died. So the plants were stimulated by the rhythm, or you could even say the vibrational impulses of the sound. So we're looking at something that's operating on a very basic level. But I think one of the biggest aspects of this whole operation is to get us to love our slavery.
There has been, I think, a definite improvement, shall we say, even in the techniques of terrorism. Well, then we come to the consideration of other techniques, of non-terroristic techniques for inducing consent and for inducing people to love their servitude.
Right? To get us to embrace that which harms us, to get us to be attracted towards that which is negative, that which is, ultimately soul-destroying. And I actually want to write an article about G.G. Allen because he just represents the epitome of this trajectory, from this freedom, this rebellion that we're given. We're going to rebel. I'm a rebel, and you go back to the Declaration of Independence. The founding fathers were rebels. And then, I'm going to shake my hips. Elvis, he's a rebel. Oh, okay, we're going to, the Beatles are going to rebel. And then Alice Cooper's going to rebel. And then David Bowie's going to rebel. And then, and then Slayer's going to rebel. And then the Sex Pistols are going to rebel. So this rebellion, this idea of this freedom the do what thou wilt, ends up, it culminates in one person. To me, this guy is like a Christ in a way. He's a Christ of this negative, degenerate system, because people are not familiar with him, but he's lauded, the postmodern writers just love him. I can't find any criticism of this guy. And this was a punk rock singer who was dosed by his brother unknowingly. He had from an abusive home, dosed by his brother and his friends. And, they put some LSD in his donut, and he flipped out, and he was never normal the same way. But he basically, his stage show, he took his clothes off, he beat people, he pounded his head with a microphone, he defecated on stage, he ate his own feces, which Aleister Crowley also did. And, he did all this stuff, and he would go in the audience and beat people. He would, he'd have a song about rape, and he'd say, I'm going to rape one of the girls here tonight. And there's women following him all over. And this degenerate was featured on all the major talk shows in America. He was promoted in a certain way.
G.G. Allen brags he's on his way to becoming the leader, the messiah for America's youth. He already claims to have 1 million followers. Wherever he goes, he plays to sell out crowds. And this is what they see: concerts filled with violence, bloodshed, and sexual assault. G.G. Allen wants to lead America's young people in a bloody revolution to take over the country. And he says nothing can be done to stop him. Why is that, G.G.?
Nobody will stop me because I am the true underground messiah. When you come to my show, you're going to a war. And I'm out for violence, chaos, lawlessness all the way. I don't care about anybody or anything except for myself and my mission. And your kids out there, if you got kids out there, they're going to be my kids. I'm going to own those kids. They're going to do anything that I say.
And why is that? Why do they do anything you say?
Because I'm the king, and they can identify with me, because the real true nonconformist children in this country are sick and tired of their parents, their schools, their people force-feeding them what to do. I am the answer. When they listen to my lyrics and they listen to my songs, they're listening to the way that it really should be, and you know that, and I know that, so don't brain, because your kids are my kids.
Do you honestly believe that you're a charismatic figure?
I believe that I am the king. I am the messiah. I rule the rock and roll underground. I'm bringing us to a revolution against the government, against the police, against any form of society that is trying to put us down and restrict us in any way, shape, or manner. You cannot conform. You must be a true nonconformist. To hell with what your parents have to say.
Okay.
I am the man.
Okay.
All you have to do is listen to what I have to say.
Okay, well, who told you you were the messiah?
I said I was. And I am, because these kids, I get letters from all...
And he said he was going to kill himself, he never killed himself. He actually died of a heroin overdose. But people laud him, people cite him as this source of freedom, of rock and roll rebellion. And so I just want people to know that this rebellion, that this core, this pathway, this is where it's going. I mean, it's not going to a development of freedom. You're not throwing off the yoke of the system. You are becoming more entrenched in the system, and you are binding yourself to those very things that you think are liberating. You are
There was a quote that someone said, and I can't remember now, but every dance step, the kids were closer to their own, their enslavement.
Oh yeah, that's Ed Rabbit. Great, Ed Rabbit was he was kind of a naturalist. He wrote the Monkey Wrench Gang. He was a very connected person. He was kind of a radical environmentalist, but this is sort of pre the co-option of that movement. And he very much was connected to nature. And so he wrote about when he saw the rock movement, and he said that the kids are dancing and they think they're being free, but with every step they're binding the chains of the slavery to industrial society tighter. And there's nothing that I think summarizes it better than that, because that's exactly what's happening. But it's not just physical change, right? It's mental change, and it's programming change, and it's conditioning paradigms.
Hans, I got to ask you, as you're researching all this more and more, you said you're starting to question some of your own beliefs and things. What do you, and then we'll go back to that, but what do you have to say about that?
It's in terms of questioning my own beliefs, it's more, I try to, I don't necessarily base my life on beliefs per se. I'm sure I have a lot of beliefs.
Let's call them foundations or whatever you want to,
Yeah, I mean, it's just seeing that all these things that I participated in, and artists, we're not what they said they were. Now, I will say one thing. I was a bit different because I did start to feel some kind of a little bit queasiness about certain things. I remember watching MTV and just feeling, not dirty, but just kind of like a little flat, a little bit, So I never totally embraced the mass culture, but it's kind of hard to realize that it's not so much the music, but as the lifestyle promoted by literary heroes, by icons that you respect, by the whole movement in psychology, even the entheogen. All this thing is promoted as a type of freedom. And this goes both with drug abuse or drug use and with us, relationships, sexual relationships. I think that seeing that this motto, which was kind of instilled as the means for liberation, as the
drugs, rock and roll.
Sex, drugs, rock and roll, or jazz, drugs, and rock and roll. I actually, after being involved, I played in a punk band when I was like 15, 16, 17 years old, and I completely dropped rock and I became a jazz musician. And then I went to India. But actually, at each one of these stages, I was kind of deconditioning myself to a certain extent, which did kind of isolate me from my peers. But, at the same time, I was also being, I read Leary, I read all these other guys, and even other aspects where, you're being offered, you're offered icons, you're offered cultural icons, and there's a level of trust, especially when you're a child. And I think that's very important, especially when you're an adolescent, especially when you are discovering the world, and not only discovering the world, but sort of formulating and developing your personality in your mind, that these sort of misdirections or dead ends, that will kill you. The average lifespan of a rock star is 36.5 years old. Average lifespan of a normal adult male is like 75.8, I think, years old. So you look at a rock star, you're going to die in half the time. What the hell is that? Is that what we should be taking in a sugar-coated pill? Rock and rebellion, the 50s, the 60s. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and that's just it. You have so many people, and I can't remember if it was this one or the last one. I mentioned an old buddy of mine that committed suicide in 2010, and his whole life was based around rocker philosophy. All the big rocker stars, Jim Morrison and yada yada, they died at 27, so he wanted to die at 27. And then when he hits 40, he ends up taking his own life. But and that just goes to show, I mean, people are programmed with this music, just like we talked about all the subliminal messages and don't fear the reaper, etc. And here's this message going on in his head. But, 40 years old, he's like, well, I never wanted to live past 27, But instead of, reading the classics and, doing all of this stuff, people think they're free by getting programmed with all of this, mind control and by, following stupid rocker philosophy. And we've all bought into it. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, and we're probably starting to sound like, conservatives, that music, it's going to rot your mind. And then you find out, wow, they were right. But it's just, you and I essentially growing up, and I remember when I was in third grade when the cable TV guys showed up to install cable, and we watched this thing called MTV, just like you did.
Okay, so
and that was in like 82, 83, 84, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And I remember all that stuff too. So it's just, looking back at all of that, and now you can see it all from this new perspective. It really was all of this. And MK Ultra and these other programs were so much broader and were really targeting, especially the middle class family.
No, certainly. And also that, the fact is that, there is a great deal of disaffection, right? You're living in a society, generally speaking, that doesn't allow you to be free. That even when it was much better back in the day, and whatever, it still was, it still was very conditioned. It still seemed very artificial. It was something that, you see your parents, and just to bring up Gigi Allen again, this tragicomic, demonic figure from the cesspool of rock that summarizes where that leads to. But you interview with him, he describes, he's like, I don't have to wake up and go to a job. You're a slave to your mortgage. You're a slave to your wife. You're a slave to your taxes. I go wherever I want. I do whatever I want. I am freedom. My body is freedom. My body is a rock and roll temple. And these ideas become ingrained because it's not only that, just going back to the Paul Lazenfeld with the Radio Project, they're developing ways of classifying groups of people into different categories, right? And looking at different groups. And this goes back to the first episode where I talked about the different aspects of how music can be used for mind control. And you see that even people that are creative, or people that are not necessarily completely immediately being dumbed down and going under the wheels of the bus. Well, let's have a little doorway out for them, and they can die at 27. Yeah, just like all these other rock stars, and it's the one thing is to understand though too, there are a lot of organic things that there's always going to be. Society is not going to be monolithic. There's going to be all different kinds of people in society. There are going to be people that are totally debauched. There's going to be total womanizers. There's going to be people that are really into sadomasochism. There's going to be transgender, whatever. But when you see that, why is this being promoted? A lot of times being promoted subliminally, or looking at Miley Cyrus or Britney Spears being promoted exactly when I looked at the Beatles songs and I looked at the records they're playing for the kids for the same, a few years later, you look at the Miley Cyrus and Miley Cyrus or whatever, they're being led down that same doorway where these nice, pristine girls who have identified. And I mentioned before the inner mirror or the inner stage. Lacan talks about that, right? Lacan is a kind of a post-Freudian psychologist. And so when you hear music, you're sort of interacting that. You're creating this fictional person that's identifying with the protagonist in the song, or can identify with that. And the more repetition, the more you're going to identify with that, especially if you're taking that unconsciously, especially if you're not being aware of what's happening. And that happens, and then you're being led down the garden path, and at the same time, you just, for me, what upsets me the most is how many lives have just been completely just immolated, or else have lost some of their impulses for freedom or higher types of activity because of their disgust from what happened. And if you go back to Woodstock, Woodstock was nothing other than, it was a precursor for Altamont, but Woodstock, they were trapped there, right? They were trapped in this place with tons of bad LSD, covered in mud, wavy gravy out there, and they were stuck. I think Woodstock sounds like the ultimate nightmare.
Yeah. Well, and isn't wavy gravy out there promoting transhumanism and all this crap now? But, so you have on the, just like Altamont and the satanic level there, and you've got Mick Jagger and the Hells Angels and Lucifer on the camera and Vito Palakis up there on the stage. But at Woodstock, you've got this massive Dionysian mystery going on with the rock idols up on stage, all of these people on drugs and fornicating in the mud, with the pig pen as the recovery station for the bad trippers. it couldn't be any more in your face. And the people that put it on are just sitting there laughing at all of the, I don't know, the genteel kids. I'm sure there was every race there, but they're just laughing at all of these people, and they're wallowing in the mud like pigs. And they're even calling the trip station, the bad trip station, the pig pen. So how much more in your face could it get that they're mocking and laughing at you with this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it really can get any more in your face. I mean, and I'm just going to give a couple of anecdotes related to the different effects of music. One of them connected to Woodstock too. The first one is that I think it was Ottawa, and there was a town square. They had massive amounts of drug dealing and crime. Right, they had a big park there. And what they did, all the local business owners got together and they put in a big speaker system. They started playing classical music. They had an 800% reduction in crime from that. 800% reduction in crime. Woodstock, too. You have, what was it? Red Hot Chili Peppers. People were given peace candles. And then they sang the song Fire, and people set fire to everything. There was, I have to look it up again, it was Korn or one of these other bands had a song, about basically beating people and raping people. And guess what? When they sang that song, massive increase in sexual violence, riots, and everything. And the artists were just playing with the audience members, including the Red Hot Chili Peppers doing the song Fire after they got their peace candles. After the day before, there had already been tremendous incidents, both of rapes and of destruction and physical violence based on specific artists' direct messages through the music. So you look at Woodstock 1 and Woodstock 2, and what you see is that, it is an open-air mind control experiment. It's nothing to look back upon with nostalgia. It's nothing to think, wow, I wish I was part of the Woodstock generation. Because if you were part of that and you haven't woken up to what was going on, then that's your own personal tragedy. But it shouldn't be encouraged. But the fact is that this is not only on a deeper level, not only has the organic creation of music as a natural expression of human society, not only has the use of music if you divide it between classical and folk music being sort of the naturally arising music of a society, there's lots of songs that came out of that we still know today. And you look even at like bluegrass or certain types of blues or whatever, that was kind of an organic outgrowth of the interactions in American society. That has been subverted. Not only has the higher cultural aspect of music as really one of the most valuable aspects of our civilization been diminished to the point of almost non-existence, even like Nobody's Home, taking Beethoven and using that for an advertisement. You're suddenly linking this, you're not only using it for a commercial, you're also ruining the impact of that music by linking it to an advertisement. So we have the aspect of the natural growth of music as an organic expression of society, or as the developmental paradigm. Now, not everybody is going to be involved. Plato obviously was, sort of an authoritarian, but you look at that in the importance of music for being a cultured person, for growing up, for developing yourself, and for just, being educated. That's also been stripped away. The actual organic development of classical music has been lost. And at the same time, it's been replaced by this artificially constructed culture that does operate on existing trends, right? You have baby boomers, you have, different post-war affluence, you have, changes in society, but they're not allowed to take place naturally. And if they're going in the wrong direction, they're squashed. Or even folk music. Folk music also became a vector of, communism. And I'm saying, first, I went to Communist Party meetings. I used to think communism was great. It seems great, but it's not, is it? No.
Yeah. Especially when you start having a family and children and everything. That's when you really wake up, I think, and start figuring this stuff out.
Yeah. And, it's, again, what starts to have been stripped away is our actual human foundations, right? Our natural organic connection with the world around us, and the fact that something music shouldn't be something you have to think about that much. Now, if if you want to develop your mind, fine, but it shouldn't be something that where you have to go back and trace all these genres and see what's going on. But what's going on is mass programming, mass induction, if you look at Ewan Cameron, the induction of shocks and all this other things, you look at cultural shocks, you look at these respite periods, you can look at these musical styles relating to a program of deconditioning and depatterning that's being implemented on a very wide spectrum of an entire society. And, at the same time, there is an induction process, right? You're being inducted through rituals, through types of sound waves, through subliminal messages into a type of energy, into a type of operation as a human being that is extremely disturbing. And that's where I, got a little bit put out by it, because, you start seeing that it's not just the music. Let's talk about the processed church. Let's talk about the finders. Let's talk about, etc. So there's a process of, I said, it's not just dumbing down, but it's also inducing you. It's also giving you ritual initiations, right, into a sort of a different space. These ritual inductions may happen totally subconsciously, but these can fundamentally transform your entire life. And okay.
No, go ahead. Well, we probably should. There's a lot of good information there, but we should probably try to hit. What were we on? Melody and rhythm, or where?
Let's hit melody and rhythm. Yeah. So melody and rhythm. So the thing about melody, I talked a bit about melody, how it works, but when you look at the scale and the octave, and you have these notes that are you basically devise specific tones, you put these into a sequence, and the sequence is very closely equivalent to a syntactical structure in spoken language, and the use of these tones and the development of these tones directly interacts with a part of our minds that can do creative reasoning, that can be able to deal with complex problems, but also it's very much related to verbal abilities and being able to follow unfolding sequential development over time. And you add rhythm. Rhythm can synchronize these emotions with vital patterns, that is a heartbeat, blood pressure, etc. And all of us have our own sort of natural rhythm. That is, we have all these different sequences or cycles of rhythm: our heartbeat, our brain frequencies, our pulse, our breathing rate, blood pressure, etc. And so I'm talking this here about classical music. So if you have developed forms of melody, it's sort of like a training ground for you to be able to do critical thinking and trains your mind to deal with more complex problems. And when rhythm and melody work together, the body's rhythms, internal rhythms, entrain and release different chemicals from the limbic system and can increase cognitive and creative potential. And melodies, more complex melodies, right? If you look, say, at classical music or any classical music, even jazz, right? You have much more complex types of melodies. And if you look at, say, jazz improvisation, there you have all these complex choices. So you start to understand those complex choices, then your mind itself begins to develop more neural networks for more complex problems, more ways to solve problems, more ways to see solutions, more paths of choice. And so these two factors working together can open the brain directly, so to speak, audio and sensory channels, and benefit cerebral skills in a great way. And of course, the inverse of this is very true. If we go the other way and we look at hip hop or rap, the melody has been completely, there's no more melody even. Or if there's a melody, it's like a leering melody. It's like a cacophony. Or even if you look at punk and you look at, even if you look at the ability set of musicians that get record contracts, some of these artists cannot sing to save their lives, and there's no melodic development.
Well,
so you can see that inverse way.
Think about death metal. These guys are up there literally just screaming. They have no melody. They cannot sing.
Yeah. And death metal is an example of something. First of all, you have extremely high pulse rate, right? Very, very high tempo, right? You have these very distorted frequencies. You have particular types of dissonance without resolution, right? So I talked about how harmony works, right? You build these chordal structures, you take separate notes and you create chords. And then you can have, based on the diatonic or 7-note scale, you can have chord progressions where you have an increase of tension, but usually you have a resolution of that tension and release. And that actually, that also is, obviously life is not all, the opposite of that is new age music where it's just all, hey, I feel great, man. So there's no tension, right? It's all release. So that doesn't necessarily have, and it can also have a relaxing effect, but for the optimal effect, you do want tension and release. But you look at death metal, you have all tension, you have, total decimation of melody, and you have incredibly, a lot of times, I've looked through preparation for these broadcasts, I've looked through some of the death metal stuff. There's one song, this is a paraphrase, but it's pretty close. Kill yourself now. Stick your mouth on the drain pipe. Slash your wrists. No reason to go on. Smash your head. Take pills. Die. Kill yourself. Kill yourself now. Okay, and that is a song, and that's pretty close. It's like, you can't even understand it, right? Unless you slow it down and actually try to analyze it or look at the song lyrics, which I did. You can hear the words when they're singing, but they're putting in these messages, and basically you have we went into the whole group identification. We didn't go into more, but you got all your buddies and you're at the metal concert and you're rebelling. You're following that path laid for you by Aleister Crowley and the Hellfire Club. All right. Well, except they're elites and they're also it's a little bit different, but you're doing what thou wilt and you're rebelling. You're creating your own identity, which is a natural process, but it's being subverted and you're being funneled into this type of music that, and you're actually, your whole response of your body and mind has been now conditioned to get a pleasure response from a negative impulse, right? You talked about how your father only listened to classical music. You put on other music, he was getting a negative response from that, right? But when you get used to something, or you gravitate towards it, and then it's possible that because you are getting stimulated. You're getting stimulated, right? If you smoke crack, if I let up my crack pipe right now, I'll be stimulated. But it's going to have okay, I don't have a crack pipe. That was
I remember as a kid, I think the only time my father let me, we're talking about, I mentioned that in the last episode, or in the bonus episode, but the only time I remember, it must have been 1984, because it was, I think, Van Halen 1984. That was the only album my dad let me play all the way through, I think, without turning it off on me, like within 2 minutes. And he's like, yeah, this solo in the middle, this is kind of nice, But, and Hot for Teacher and all that stuff, right? Having sex with a school teacher and...
Might as well jump. Go ahead and jump. Another song about suicide.
Yeah, there you go.
But very positive, dun, dun, very like upbeat chord progression. Yeah. Go ahead and jump. Might as well jump, yeah. And that's just, and you can start pulling these messages out, right, of the songs. But, but here's, Eddie Van Halen was.
Yeah, and he's, considered one of the best guitarists out there. Now I saw a picture of him a couple of years ago, and he just looked like a tore-up meth heroin addict. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Let's get back into, where were we? Why is music so valuable? Or were we still discussing melody and rhythm? Yeah,
so why music can be very valuable. It's actually a very complex mathematical order. So in terms of music, we talk about frequencies, cycles per second, harmonic resonances, harmonic frequencies. This is something that actually we see all around us in the world. You see it in mathematics. You see it even when you throw a rock in the water. You see it in fractal patterns of birds or plants. I mean, it is directly connected to mathematics, and it's a very highly ordered system. And ultimately, John Blacking, one of the early musicologists, he describes music as humanly organized sound. So it is a way of human beings to organize sound, to organize vibrational patterns. We can't see music, right? It's not visible unless you have MTV. But it's so because of patterns in rhythm and pitch, contrasting characters of phrases. That means a phrase can be very slow or languorous, can be very happy, bouncy, etc. Repetition and variations, development of themes, right? So, for example, in classical music, you have the sonata theme where you have two major melodic themes, and these are taken through all these very complicated, complex may not the word, they should be melodic and pleasing, but they're taken through all these series of transformations of these different melodic figures, and you have these very large structural bodies of the sound. And by listening to that and understanding it, the brain can release serotonin, as you said already, and it also helps develop logic. And in fact, you can get a rational transport. The reason, the left brain and the right brain can actually become synchronized. So you get this emotional response. You can get a type of a trance or being carried away. But at the same time, you do have this, you're also kind of in control. You're not just with the cult leader. You're not drinking the daime and putting on your uniform and, being part of a little nice funded mind control experiment. But music is non-mediated. That's one thing about music. It has a non-mediated impact. What do I mean by that? You look at poetry. I gave my love a cherry that had no pit. Okay, so not a great poem. It's not mine. But I do actually like poetry quite a bit. But poetry is mediated by words and meaning and language. Visual art is mediated by visual representation or non-representation, right? And you can look at non-representational art, and now that came about. But basically, painting is still, generally speaking, at least classical painting or painting until, the hyper-abstract expression is mediated by visual imageries, right? And light, sound, and color. But music can directly operate on the brain and directly impact the emotions. So that's what makes it very powerful and unique as a medium, and makes it, a vector, again, a great vector for freedom, liberation, or a vector for control. But one of the most important things to keep in mind is that, most people are not going to take the time to listen to very complex works of music unless they're trained in it. Most people are not going to take the time to go outside what is presented to them that's around them, right? Most people do not live in organic communities where there's a folk tradition. I have some of my relatives, up in the, hills of Pennsylvania, and, they have songs that they've, songs for 150 years old. Some of these old guys, they know these old songs. And so that's kind of the folk music, which is, if you look at popular music, it's actually taking, you have folk music, you have music that people sing, people getting together and singing music together. You have music as a way for people to bond. Not everyone that performs music is going to be a virtuoso. Some people can't even sing in tune. There's a condition known as amusia, right, where people are not able to sing. They can't even hear notes. They're tone deaf. And so that happens. But the fact is that folk music, what we call quote unquote folk music, is something that generally would grow out of the community or grow out of your tradition or your family, and something was done together and had its thing. And you could write a song and people would write songs, and that's what you look at the whole the Smithsonian Folkways. They're taking particular instances of this folk music, but they're using this to generate a mass culture, which is a very different aspect. And so you do have to differentiate between the folk and the classical, in that somebody may know two or three chords and may be a limited musician, but he may sing a song from the heart. And he may have something that connects him with his surroundings and with his heritage and who he is and how he feels. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's what folk music is. Then, at the other hand, if you take aspects of, say, for example, the blues culture, with these very driving beats, which was related primarily to the transplanted African Americans that went to industrial centers in Chicago. And this is very rough and tumble. It's highly sexual music. It's from a very, very different cultural background than the mass of America. You take this and translate it into a popular music form that's rammed down the throats of the whole society. Or not say rammed down, but it permeates the society. You start to kind of manipulate or change the natural growth of these things. But especially the worst thing, I think, is that the potency of music and the importance of it for development, and especially for children. You mentioned that because I have the same thing. How many crappy songs are just inscribed on my brain, and how many of those songs are encoded messages which have influenced my personality and my behavior and my development. Maybe some of them haven't, maybe some of them have. But the fact that that was done to me on a mass scale, is kind of disconcerting.
Well, yeah, and that's why you and I are here trying to undo, because it was done to us, we feel kind of obligated to help others recognize this and get, free of it. Let's get into, do we discuss how music can affect us, or should we discuss musical miracles?
Okay, well, I'm going to skip ahead and I'm going to just talk about music and hypnosis very briefly, and just give a little history of that. And then we probably can talk about A440.
All right.
And again,
sounds good.
And I do hope that people listen to our other episode, because both of these are sort of standalone.
Yeah. There's a lot of meat. Well, there's a lot of meat in the whole series. So, ladies and gentlemen, we do recommend that you listen to all of it. And it is, it's going to be 10, 12 hours of material total, but we think it's well worth your investment and the time.
Yeah. So just briefly a little bit on music and hypnosis. Of course, given the effect that music does have on the mind, that music has been used for hypnosis, beginning basically in the 1700s, and sort of around the Enlightenment era. Of course, it was used before that. We have all the different mystery schools, et cetera, et cetera. But we now have the impact of a scientific paradigm. Jean-Marie Charcot was very prominent French scientist working with hypnotism. And also we go a little bit more contemporary. We look at Pavlov and his use of bells and other tones to create reflex conditioned responses. And the whole point of these conditioned responses is to bypass the conscious mind. And so, the question is, how much of that is, you look at music and trance, there's this autosuggestive aspect of that. But at the same time, there is the fact that there are physiological responses. So mesmerism, the
mesmerize, sure.
Yeah, the father of modern hypnosis. He described it as magnetic sleep or artificial somnambulism. And animal magnetism, he described that as a matter of sympathetic vibration. Animal magnetism basically meaning being able to hypnotize somebody. But that term, of course, has come into our lexicon as, he's got animal magnetism, right? Or she's got animal magnetism. But animal magnetism was a term he used for the induction of specific hypnotic states. In fact, and this was one of the ways of inducing this. Animal magnetism referring to the human body, right? The human animal, and magnetic principles or vibrational principles, right? So Mesmer used specific types of tones. He had his own instruments he developed to induce trances or even induce hysteria. So same time you have induction of hysteria, people screaming. Charcot, I have just a quote from Charcot, I'll read real quick here. Quote, "I have these two hysterics take a seat on the sound box of a large tuning fork. As soon as I set the tuning fork vibrating, you can see that they fall into catalepsy. When we stop the vibrations, they fall into somnambulism. If we begin new vibrations with the tuning fork, the catalepsy reappears. Is this strange fact due to the excitation of the auditory sensitivity or that of sensitivity in general? Okay, so there was, research, again, on pitches, frequencies, and the induction of these states, and we can go into that. Of course, this is a gigantic subject, but I think that's a good kind of segue into the A440. Should I leave out the developmental paradigms of music? I talked about that, music as an evolutionary aspect. Should we just leave that for the other?
Go cover it for a moment and, grab a guitar and start tuning it while you do.
Okay, all right. So just very briefly, music, evolutionary theories of music relate to that of mate attraction. One of them is that, you can attract a better mate, or you're more attractive to the opposite sex through music. Social glue, or that of basically linking the society, helping bring the society together. Communication between mother and a child. There's deliberate aspect of music as cognitive training. Music is basically a way that we learn to interact with our environments to use our minds, right? So sound is an aspect of our environment, and music serves as a way to sort of train people to develop greater abilities. The fifth paradigm is that of known as continuism, which is a direct connection between man and the environment. You hear the sounds of nature, you hear a thunderstorm, you hear the birds, you hear the water, and it have a relational aspect, that of connecting with those sounds, or also that of a manipulative aspect in terms of magic, right, using the vibrational energy to change nature. So there's a whole lot of stuff with that. And then the sixth paradigm is that of non-adaptive pleasure seeking, which is that music is hedonic, which means that according to this, music just feels good, and that's why people did it. Music developed because it felt good. My personal opinion is that all these aspects are part of it. And we don't have time to get into this and look for my book, but you look at the aspect of how the brain evolved, how human beings evolved. You can see that music certainly was a part of that evolutionary process, and you can kind of trace the cognitive development. Whether or not music influenced that or was an artifact of that development, I think that's something that we can see. And just real briefly, just hit on. I think we have slide 4, neurosimulation. And slide 4, we're talking about how lyrics work, and kind of going back what we did in the beginning of the show. If you look at how you look at an actual sensory impulse and an imagination of that sensory impulse, they're operating almost on the same parts of the mind. So in fact, imagining something can also create a very similar but not exact neural response. So if you think about song lyrics, I mentioned this very dark song about suicide, but I mean, that song, of course, that's kind of the extreme end. But I mean, if you're hearing that, especially if it's going in your subconscious, because you don't even know what the lyrics are. Most of the time, you're just blasting it so loud, and you're inducting yourself into a trance state. These words are having an impact, and with the music, you may be actually recreating that in your mind, these particular actions or activities. And imagine, that's how the imagination works. In fact, this is kind of how a lot of art works. You read a novel, you go into a dream, you watch a movie, you sort of have that, you kind of create that in your mind. We go to slide 5, motor sensory cortex. I mentioned the motor neurons. So basically our movements and in fact our body is inscribed on our mind, so to speak, meaning that we have a neurological representation of our body. We have a body. We have a body image is not just an abstract, it's not just a feminist, you're gazing upon my body image with your evil male gaze, but the body image is actually, we have a representation of our bodies within our minds, right? We have a mapping of our bodies, as well as, of course, the direct, interaction between sensory efferent. Efferent means nerve impulses, traveling through our brain, and also but even our sense of our bodies and how we act is is sort of inscribed on our minds. So you can see that imagining an action, either, you're doing a mental rehearsal, you're learning how to gain a skill by visualizing it, or you're listening to a song. Let's mention Heroin by the Velvet Underground. You have a shamanistic drum beat, right? That drum beat, you have this driving drum beat that's entraining you to that music, and you have the song about heroin. And so, and there's physical accessories for that. You're in a certain way. If you're imagining that, you can be imagining these actions, and you have a much greater likelihood, perhaps, or you're sowing seeds. You can look at it as seeds, right? Obviously, I'm not going to make a claim. You hear a song, you're going to do this. You hear a song, you're going to commit suicide or become a Satanist or shave your chest, or whatever, or get a sex change. No, but this is having influence. It is sowing seeds, and it does have a neurological component where these things are being represented in the mind and creating neural pathways that increase the likelihood of particular actions, especially when your conscious control mechanism is not engaged.
Yeah, it's being completely open-minded without being critical-minded.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, open-mindedness, it's, of course, it's very interesting. We will get into this much more detail, but Delgado and all these guys, obviously you can find specific locations on the brain to make movements happen.
Electronic mind control research is not new. A scientific milestone in this area came in the 1960s when Dr. Jose Delgado demonstrated remote control over a charging bull. By connecting a radio antenna to electrodes inserted into the bull's brain, Delgado proved that the animal's aggressive impulses could be thwarted by electronically manipulating the bull's muscle reflexes.
Do you realize the fantastic possibilities if from the outside we could modify the inside? Could we give messages to the inside? But the beauty is that now we are not using electrodes.
But what's even more interesting, just to touch on this briefly, embodied cognition, etc., you look at the mind, your actual bodily image can be transformed or reified into a representation. Look at these women that have surgery to look like Barbie dolls. If you look at transhumanism, you can have people that are so disconnected from their actual lived experience that they can transform their own body image, or it has been transformed for them. Their somatic image has been conditioned, and then that's where you see people like doing all these crazy things to their body or getting surgery,
and they actually think they're evolved and whatnot too.
Yeah, and that's evolving to the man-machine hybrid.
Sure. We should probably get to A440 because we're rolling up on 2 hours here.
Okay, you want to just take 5 here, and then I'll tune the guitars?
Sure. All right, so we just took a little break, and now we're ready to go into the A440 and A432 and all that good stuff. And so let's jump into it, Hans.
Okay. Yeah, so the issue of A440 is something that I wasn't particularly aware of or interested in, but I came across the impact of tuning, through sitar when I was, working on some kind of musical analysis as well as just playing sitar. And I noticed that one artist, Ustad Vlad Khan, who's actually one of the great, I really recommend everyone to listen to Ustad Vlad Khan, just one of the great artists, certainly of the 20th century. Actually, he's the father of my teacher, Ustad Sujat Khan. But I noticed that he played this melody, this raga, and it sounded very different from the current kind of number one sitarist. And I couldn't figure out why, and I did a very detailed pitch analysis. And I realized that, first of all, he was not tuning to A440. He was tuning to a different pitch. This is not A432, but it was A427.39 hertz or whatever. But basically, I started to be interested in the impact of tuning and how that works. And as I just did my own work on it, I noticed that certain music was tuned differently. Certain, period orchestras were tuned to different frequencies. I got to see a very interesting seminar with a pianist who had, different tunings from different eras and had several pianos tuned to different frequencies. And then I discovered that, hey, there's a controversy, A440 versus A432. And
aren't there even a lot of other tuning frequencies as well? And what's the importance of those?
Well, there's actually been kind of there's been a lot of different notes people have tuned to. If you look, throughout different cultures, if you look throughout the history of, Western orchestral music in general, there's kind of been a very great range of frequencies, going all the way up from, I think Mozart tuned to 422 and going up to certain, brass bands that were going up to A456. So you find different, tunings, but you have to keep in mind that we talked about octaves in the last episode. You have to keep in mind that at a certain point, you're going to cross over the threshold ratio. So, if you go up a certain number of cycles per second, you're going to get into, a different, almost like you're tuning to B flat, a different note, in a different scale. But, A440 is something that there really never was a universal standard in tuning. However, if you go back to ancient, you go back to Pythagoras and what they devised, first of all, the tuning note was based off of C, not A. So everything was based off of C, like middle C. And even in Indian classical music, you find a similar thing where the tuning note, was based off of, the tuning note meaning a tonic. And just to clarify what that means, there's two basic ratios. One of them is hertz, which is cycles per second. So whatever, if you have a frequency, 440 hertz means 440 cycles per second. You have 6 cycles per second, used in ELF weaponry, 8 cycles per second used in considered to resonate with the earth, and used quite a bit in therapy, right? So, and those are infrasounds or ELF, extremely low frequencies. They're inaudible, and in fact, the brain itself operates on these much lower frequencies. You have beta, alpha, theta, and delta. Different cycles of brain waves, and these go from starting from like 1 to 4 hertz. So very, very low vibratory ratios, but the 432 was used by Pythagoras. Actually, C is 256, and this particular ratio was seen as, or was ascertained to correspond with a whole bunch of other ratios, a whole bunch of other different vibratory bodies. And in fact, you find that ratio 432 used in temple construction. If you look at the prayer mala in India, it's 108 beads, that's a multiple of 432. You find that the diameter of the sun is 864,000 miles, which is 432 times 2. Diameter of the moon is 2,160 miles, 432 times 5. Precession of the equinox is 25,920 years, which is 432 times 60. You have the astrological ages, which also becomes a multiple of 432. In ancient India, the yugas, the time cycles, were 432 million years. The current time cycle we're in is the Kali Yuga, which is, not to say we're in the Book of Revelations, but the Kali Yuga is kind of the age of destruction. It lasts 432,000 years though. So, but all of them are based on ratios of 432. Tiger Woods' golf ball, they did scientific studies, and the 432 dimples was the ultimate ratio to reduce drag, to have the most velocity. frequencies of light. So basically, the 432 number, or 432,000, including the speed of light, 186,624 miles per hour, is basically a multiple also of 432. So you basically see that there's a lot of stuff that connects that particular frequency with many other types of resonating or pulsating fields. And so the fact is that the ratios, when you look at Pythagoras, defining the monochord, he invented an instrument where you take a single string and you start dividing that into different ratios, where you create intervals or particular, based on the overtone series, which means that the frequencies that come off a fundamental pitch, you have a series of other vibrations that come off of that. And so that was all based on the 432 ratio. And there was a study done in India in 2011, effects of life wave music on human biofield. I'm not sure Center for Biofield Science. I have not met them, but they did a paper on that, and they found that compared to A440, A432 reduced stress levels. It helped with backaches, less depression, fewer muscle spasms, less chronic fatigue syndrome, lower blood pressure, reduced insomnia, and better concentration. And so that's A432. And there's another recent study that was done in 2014, and they looked at patients with paranoia, intense anxiety, and other issues, basically related, you describe as an intense fear response. And they found that music at A440 did not really change their condition, but they played in the sort of traditional tuning or varieties tuning of A432. Their conditions were ameliorated. They were greatly improved. So that's sort of the basic layout of A432. And then you can get deeper with that. There's all kinds of numerology, biblical references related to that particular number. And you find it, as I mentioned, Hinduism, but also, very interestingly, in ancient architecture. If you look at very complex architecture of these Neolithic sites and other types of temples, you do find this ratio there. So within Western history, there was a decision. There was a paper who was Joseph Sauvé, who was a contemporary of Bach. And I gave a quote from Bach in the beginning of this exegesis of the subject, and he said that the fundamental aim of music is the glory of God and the upliftment of humanity. So he really looked at music as being a very sacred endeavor. And actually, when he talks about bass, it's very interesting, because the function of the bass frequencies, as that relates to music, is very interesting as well, but we'll get into that later. But
what we have here is the basically the takeover of the Pied Piper instead, right?
Yeah. Well, this is a little tangent, but I like tangents. Holotropic thinking, right? So all the pieces will come together at the end. But bass, if you look at hip hop and all this music reduced to the bass, I remember going into a club. I'm not, this was several years ago. I hadn't been into any kind of, dance club for many years, and they were playing music. It was just all bass, extremely low bass, And so for Bach, the bass was actually the medium of the interface between the human being and the divine, or in this case, otherwise, right? But the bass actually, sort of like rhythm, has a very fundamental effect on the human body, given ELF frequencies. But anyway, so this Joseph Sauvé defined. He was a scientist, was not a musician, but considered the father of modern acoustics. And this is, he died 1653 to 1716 were his years, and he came up with, he noticed the philosophical pitch, which was C equals 256, 256 hertz, That's cycles per second. And that pitch actually corresponds with Pythagoras, and again with the C is 432. And what's very interesting, C, even given the process of tempering the scale, and let me go into that. And when I do Indian music, I'll get into that in more detail. But the scale, actually, all the music we hear is always slightly out of tune. That reason being that when you want to play in different keys, every time you take the cycle of fifths, which means if you go up from one note, I'll just grab a guitar to show that. So if you go up from, say, here's C, up to a fifth, another fifth. So from all these are basically modulation of the overtone series to get different tonics or different keys, right? And every time you do that, you get a small little fraction that doesn't fit in. That's called the Pythagorean comma. And that's why if you look at, say, Indian music, you're playing in a single key, you can actually have completely naturally tuned notes. But what was done was creating what's known as a tempered scale, where every note is divided into a ratio called cents. Cents is a division. It does not directly correspond with hertz, but it's related to the musical frequency interval, that is half step, whole step, major third, sixth, seventh, etc. So this the cents is sort of a mathematical derivation, but even with that sort of mathematical derivation of intervallic space, all the C's in A432 are all whole numbers. That you don't have all these crazy fractions. And in the 19th century, I think it was 1871, Tsar Alexander of Russia gave a gift of a bunch of band instruments, brass instruments, to Austria. A little Austrian connection there. And these were tuned to A440. It was a brighter frequency, right? It was brighter, and it was also, well, you could say it was more conducive for military bands, because that's what that was for, right? It's for military bands. And so that, and again, there's been a huge amount of various frequencies, throughout the ages. But Alexander's gift and this movement to the A440 created our contemporary complete locking into, you could say, entrainment with the frequency of A440. And this is a very interesting story because its roots are a little bit buried. It's one of those things where you can't really find out what exactly happened. And that's what makes it interesting to me, because when I see things being hidden, I think there's something they're hiding, or things are being obscured. And I think I've mentioned this before, but if you look in the New Grove Encyclopedia of Music, which is the gold standard for musicology for all research on music, they have the wrong year for when this decision was taken in England. So that's kind of a red herring, right? And you find these wrong references, even especially with declassified documents. When we go into the psychotronic weaponry, et cetera, a lot of times you'll find a patent number and they'll give the wrong year or the wrong month, so you can never find the right patent. So just a little aside. I'm just going to close the door here. We were able to trace down a couple of names involved in A440, or especially one, Sir James Swinburne, and that's really the only name that we can find. So, and then there's actually the Swinburne University of Technology named after him. And but he wrote a book called, he wrote three at least, but one of them is called Population and the Social Problem. So we see that he's a eugenicist and et cetera. He was one of the members of the Faraday Society. But these are the guys that create this. He and another guy, John Deegan, and behind. Or in front of essentially the British Standards Institute. But, so it's I was out there online with you earlier today. We were plugging stuff into the brain database, trying to map these guys out. And it's the information is very scarce there.
So, I did order a copy of this Population Social Problem book by Swinburne. But, I'm hoping we'll get, find a hit in that book. But I'm guessing somebody's going to have to go to the Swinburne University or something like that to find the actual archives of where this information is coming from, because obviously he wouldn't have a university named after him unless he had contributed some major intel operation or something.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, just to retract a little bit, not retract, but go back in time a little bit. The movement. So we basically have Alexander, Tsar Alexander, giving this gift of these instruments. These are brass instruments, right? So guitar, you can retune the guitar. Actually, the Stradivarius violins are also all tuned to A432, right? And when you have particular instruments that are very difficult to retune, right? So with a brass instrument, but especially a mallet instrument, if that pitch is fixed, you have to throw the instrument out if you're because you can't tune it. You can't do anything with it, right? I mean, it's a real pain to tune a piano, but you can tune a piano. You can't tune your vibraphone or your glockenspiel or whatever. But J.C. Deegan is sort of the friendly face of A440. Beginning in 1900 and a little bit later, he was in the Navy, and he had a kind of a musical instrument manufacturing empire, and he was a big spokesperson for the A440. And I've looked at several of his articles. His primary argument is related to temperature, in that. And there was France at that time had A435. They had designated tone, and there was actually a lot of resistance to A440. And even now, you have Pavarotti and many other top opera singers.
There's the Schiller Institute. I was on their website today checking that out, and they're all against the A440 as well.
Yeah, except the Schiller Institute has a little nice piece of disinfo, is that Joseph Goebbels of Germany actually created the A440, which actually it started in the early 20th century, and J.C. Deegan.
Did they ask if Goebbels was at the meeting there? Or did they say that he created it?
They say it was done through Germany, and it was a Nazi creation.
They're the British firms. Look over there.
Yeah, but anyways, so J.C. Deegan was going around writing articles for journals, and then somebody, and I have not been able to trace the funding source. This stuff is very murky. In the early 20th century. There was all these brass bands, right? So I've even looked into all the different, the funding for all these. So every city had a brass band. And for example, like in Chicago, say in the summer of 1915, I think there's like 350,000 people attended these public summer concerts of these big brass bands. And then somebody started supplying them brass instruments tuned to A440. And Deegan was promoting this at the same time. And then in 1917, the American Federation of Musicians decided to change standard tuning to A440. Europe was totally set against it. All over Europe, there was a lot of, feedback. There was a series. There's 10,000 resistance, feedback, negative feedback. Meaning there was 10,000 letters were written against this when they tried to implement this, and then there's another point they tried to do. There's like 20,000 letters from established orchestral musicians. But anyways, so 1917, American Federation of Musicians adopted this. Now this is a union, right? So it doesn't mean that it's binding. It's not a binding agreement. It's not an international standard. Okay, but fast forward to 1939. May of 1939, 3 months before World War II, there is a meeting, a rather mysterious meeting that was international conference on changing the pitch. All the records are lost, all the minutes are lost, but the attendees are lost. There's no record of that meeting, but we know it occurred. It was paid for, or the expenditure of this conference was funded by the British Standards Institute. And unfortunately, they in 1972, I think, they lost the paper record when they were shifting their offices. And they, you can find any other record, but that's missing. But in 1939, so the British Standards Institute decided to change the pitch, and then they began broadcasting A440 on the radio. Before, like every show, they broadcasted at night, so they just started playing this A440 frequency, and they had a very complex mechanism. It was like this, I forget the exact construction of the device, but it was like 1,000. They had an exact frequency emitter. They had this very complex, I don't want anyone, some science savvy guy to come down on me, but I think they had like 1,000 piezographs. They had all these different layers to make sure it was exact A440. And they started broadcasting that frequency, and this is right before World War II, and they were broadcasting this all the time. So before programs, I think it was every hour, they'd play A440. There was another meeting in 1941 to solidify this that is also lost. So all records of that are lost. And then in 1953, 23,000 French musicians voted against Germany and Britain pushing the A440 standard. So in 1953, there was a major pushback against the implementation of this. There was an international conference in 41. I think there was another one in 44, and then in 53 again the French, 23,000 musicians, and these are all acclaimed musicians. But finally, by 55, A440 was established, and basically, one thing to understand that's very important is that we're starting in the early part of the 20th century. We're entering into the era of Marconi, the development of the radio. We're entering the era of mass broadcast, mass production of music, mass reproduction of music. Before then, if you wanted to hear an opera singer, you had to fly out there and hear them. I mean, you did have, player pianos or whatever. But then even with the early recording industry, you have pretty primitive, wax cylinder recording. You have very primitive musical reproduction, right? I mean, Edison, they're inventing means of recording music, but it's not a 3D high fidelity sound. You guys have probably heard, even early 78 RPM recordings, and they're recording off it's not sounding high fidelity. So, but with broadcast standards, A440 has immense impact because you can basically almost impact every area of the globe. And notice it started in America first. And notice some of the years, 1917, 1939, 1941, and then 1953 French pushback. But then there's a meeting in 71 or 72 that affirmed this as the international standard of pitch. So all instruments manufactured in the world should be manufactured to A440. And just to add the fact that these standards, these are international standards. These are like how you make, parts of an airplane so you don't fall out of the sky. This is how you make. These are the international standards for everything. These are manufactured.
It's just like for computers and network technology. You have the Institute of Electronic Standards or whatever, and they make everything just right so that everyone can connect a Cat5 or a Cat6 cable into the side of their computer or, all of this stuff and be able to make their computers run, all the hard drives use the same connectors, all of this stuff. It's all compatible. So then they come in and then they're saying all of music, which isn't related to anything like that and doesn't plug in to anything like that. Suddenly they're laying down standards on top of it that didn't need to be there.
Yeah, and I found the dates like before and after that date. One of the standards is camouflage paint. A particular type of electrical circuit board manufacturer. You know what I mean? So again, and these are obviously international standards are important, but it is important to keep in mind though that this also was imposed on recording artists. So you go to like EMI, the various record labels, and they start imposing this tuning standard on musicians, right? And so if you go back and listen to earlier recordings, you're not going to find A440. You're going to find a variety of different tunings, especially in folk stuff. But this,
you want to give some examples?
Yeah, I will. So
we're already at we're already way past 2 hours on this one here. So
okay. That's all right. I got all the time in the world.
We've got a lot of good material, and we still got at least one more episode coming after this, folks.
Yeah, and just to say that when you change the fundamental tuning frequency, every instrument has to be aligned with that. So you have a piano, you have a keyboard, you have, and it's interesting to note that J.C. Deegan, again, he made mallet instruments that are permanently tuned, right? So if you have a mallet instrument that's tuned to A432, you cannot play that with an orchestra in A440. You can't use it. There's nothing you can do, right? So when you have kind of hardwired instruments, so to speak, they cannot be changed. So it's interesting that the guy pushing it was the major manufacturer of instruments that have a permanent tuning.
Well, sure, and then so then he's making all the sales on it because he promotes it, puts it out there, and then makes all the sales of all the stuff in the future because everybody's got to replace their instruments.
Yeah, and then you start giving out free instruments to state-funded brass bands. Then, of course, the musicians union and the American Federation of Musicians is a musicians union. It's not a standards body. It's just musicians union, and you know what I mean. So it's not like
Yeah.
It's not a binding resolution, but it does show that this started, and then after, I do not know, but after World War II, Germany and Britain certainly were the leaders of implementing this tuning of this pitch.
Sure.
So just to demonstrate, just as a thing. So I played some different music here on another thing, but I'm just gonna play a few chords and kind of noodle around a bit. I'm not gonna play a specific piece. These are steel string guitars, so normally a nylon string guitar for playing classical guitar is what's required. But I'll play a few chord progressions and just kind of compare the difference and see if the listeners notice any difference in the music itself from this tuning frequency. So. A guitar tuned to A440, and I just played a basic chord progression, and then I did a little bit of improvisation in some related scales. Now I'm going to play the same thing on a guitar tuned to A432.
Well, you can hear Skype distorted a few times in there. We had that issue with the last recording too. So that is Skype that is cutting in and out a little bit there in the audio track.
Yeah, yeah, and I can also do that demo, but just as a introspective psychology, introspective means to sort of phenomenological approach where you try to allow direct access to your sensory inputs without sort of judging them or differentiating them, so, but introspective, also just my own subjective response. I'll say that, I played the same thing, but I approached it very differently. When I played it on the A440 guitar, I was much more aggressive, actually. Not trying to be, but I felt, a little bit more compelled. The other A432, I was a little more centered, and it wasn't...
Well, it felt more relaxing, the A432.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the truth, I really noticed it. Let me just do one little other... I'll just do like a little jazz thing and just see here. That's Stella by Starlight, a Jerome Kern composition.
And this is A432 now?
Yep. Anyways, it's, actually, just to say subjectively, I have never done that, playing two guitars back to back. I mean, obviously there's some difference in tone in the guitar, but it's kind of dramatic, actually, in a certain way, because, but the one thing, and there's been a lot of studies with A440, the studies, they don't use MRI and stuff, but musicians, you get conditioned to a certain type of frequency. So it does seem like with the A432, this is more kind of easy, kind of natural, but without that impulse. Like, I don't feel like, playing fast as much. On the different tuning. I don't know. It's I don't know if you noticed that with that jazz tune either, but.
All right, Hans. So what can the audience expect for part 4?
Well, part 4, barring any serious accident or injury, is going to go into a little bit deeper of the aspects of music and some of this, social transformation. I'm going to go into Indian classical music and show kind of a different system of sound and music, just to give people kind of perspective, right? Because these are all, it's like a language, right? It's something that develops in different ways, and I think it's a great tradition. It's interesting for people to have contact with. But also, I think that as we get into some of the heavier things, which are going to be again, kind of more deeply in the occult aspect, and some of the ways that we look at these cultural revolutions as being part of a much deeper agenda, and then from that going into a lot of the research, electromagnetic frequencies, this whole vibrational, infrasonic, psychotronic weaponry, various things like that, and kind of break down that stuff a little more concrete way so people can see exactly what kind of technology that we know about is out there, and so they can be a little more aware of the playing field that we're operating on right now.
And we're going to get into FM radio, the history of any of that good stuff too?
Certainly, yeah. In fact, we're going to hit the history of FM radio first, occult aspects of music, then we're going to go into FM radio, and then go into kind of the development of these different technologies.
Excellent. All right, Hans, thank you so much, and let's call that a wrap for part 3.
All right. Take care, my friend.
You too.